Hello everybody, welcome back to another Deltarune theory. Why have you done this to me? I guess I've done it to myself because I gave you the option, but I really didn't think you'd actually pick Rouxls Knight. Anyway, here we are, Rouxls Kaard, the Knight. Can it be? Probably not, but I guess we're gonna go over it, just in case. Usually with these videos, the structure is I give you some reasoned evidence, or at least as reasoned as it can be. And then slowly as the video goes on, it devolves into more and more chaos until I have my crazy theory at the end of the video. This video isn't going to be like that because it's all crazy because it's Rouxls Night. So I don't know what you want from me. You voted for this, so you better like and subscribe. All right, let's just start. So, Rouxls W's. So, what is Rouxls? Well, Rouxls is a darkener, and that means King would have good reason to trust him because King hates Lightners. So if the Knight was a darkener, that makes that work out. When could he have done it? Presumably any time, because he could travel through the Dark Worlds like Rouxls maybe, and also he canonically has the ability to teleport, so maybe he could just do that. Where? Well, both locations happen to be where the heroes of prophecy were going. So perhaps Rouxls just wants to be the best evil henchman, and so he wants to create these heroic villain clashes so that he can try to come out on top. Why? Well, there's that reason. Maybe he just wants to be powerful, though. Like, I don't know why he wouldn't usurp the kings, and that was the case in Chapter 1, but maybe he just wants, like, to be this right-hand man of the most powerful being in the world. And also, maybe it's the freedom theme. Who knows? He might have connections to Gaster. We'll get into that craziness later. And if it is freedom and he wants to escape the dark world and go to the light world or something, I mean, the Knight's actions would be a way to do that, I guess, potentially. And then how? Well, Rouxls is shown to wield a sword in Chapter 2. He's got his pirate scimitar. So maybe he does have a sword or a knife. Alright, the traits that make him a good candidate. This is mostly the stuff that made people delude themselves into thinking this could actually happen. Alright, Rouxls is a darkener, and King would trust him for that reason. We've already kind of gone over that. But there's the Sham line about the situation, where Sham says, "But recently a strange knight appeared, and 3 of the kings were locked away. The remaining king put him and his strange son into power." And the way this is phrased is really weird, because you'd think if Sham was talking about King putting himself and his strange son Lancer into power, he would say the king put himself and his strange son into power, not the king put him and his strange son. The way this is worded makes it seem like Sham is saying the king put the strange knight in the earlier sentence and his strange son Lancer into power. And that even kind of works with Lancer calling Rouxls his other dad or lesser dad or whatever. Because if the reading is the king put him, the knight, and his strange son into power, that makes it sound like it's the knight's son who's being put into power. So it's just all around a mess. And I think it's mostly just because Sham kind of has a certain way of speaking. But it does lead to this opening for us, so good job, Rouxls Knighters. In we go. So the second thing is that Rouxls Kaard and Roaring Knight have the same initials. Oh. So, you know, Rouxls, famously kind of pompous and full of himself, perhaps he wanted his moniker to have his same initials in it, so it was some sort of big reveal later. And we also get, there's like a box puzzle in Chapter 1, right, where Susie says she's going to impale herself on the fence. In that, he signs, presumably Rouxls, signs the piece of paper as RK. So we know that it's 2 names, like Rouxls Kaard isn't one name. I mean, I would assume it isn't, but you never know. And so if he was signing it Rouxls Kaard, he could also be signing it Roaring Knight, and we'd never even know. Isn't that crazy? Rouxls wants to serve the biggest bad, so perhaps he's resorting to creating the big bads himself. This kind of goes along with what I was talking about with the motive earlier, that perhaps Rouxls, being the ultimate henchman, wants to find the perfect supervillain. So basically he's a minion from the Minions movie, is what we're saying. Rouxls has 3 musical themes. That's actually kind of crazy, although Hip Shop might just end up being a shop theme, it looks like, because Green Room, which we got from one of the not the newsletters, I was going to say updates. It is an update, but specifically it's the newsletters, has the same theme as Hip Shop. It's just a remix, but you never know. Maybe Rouxls is running that shop. We don't know. He also has a talk portrait, which a lot of people bring up that Alvin doesn't have a talk portrait as a knock against him being the knight. So surely Rouxls having a talk portrait is a point for him potentially being the knight. He's also one of the few characters to show up in both Chapter 1 and 2 and be, like, relevant to both of them. So clearly, that makes him a strong candidate. He has an ultimate attack we haven't seen yet. In Chapter 2, he says he's going to use his ultimate attack and then he turns to stone. So that could come up later if he's the knight. This classic Spamton quote that I brought up in every video. What's Rouxls' explanation for it? Well, speaking of communion, Chris, did you know that the knight... No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Too many excess vacation days. Take a goddamn vacation straight to hell. So that's Spamton. Burger Pants has a line in Undertale where he says, I can't go to hell. I'm all out of vacation days. So maybe because Rouxls is also a shopkeeper and also has like a long angular face like Burger Pants, it's all coming together is what I'm saying. Do you buy that? Real Rouxls Knighters buy that. Anyway, he's a new character, which I've talked about before, is something I expect the knight to be, just because if it was going to be an Undertale character, then why not save them for Deltarune? We know Deltarune was in concept before Undertale came out. And then Rouxls, he's got long arms. And in Queen's description of the knight, she says its long arms reached out and then created the fountain. So, Rouxls has got long arms. Something to keep in mind. Very important. But okay. We all know it's not going to be Rouxls Knight. There's so much wrong with this idea. For one, he's a Darkener, and as far as we know, you need determination to be able to create a dark fountain. We're pretty sure Darkeners don't have that. Otherwise, why would Queen have to seek out Noelle to make a new knight? Why couldn't she just do it herself? Or get, like, I don't know, Task Manager to do it. Task Manager seems pretty determined. Anyway, there's also the problem of how would Rouxls create the fountain he's from? Because we're pretty sure Rouxls is a Rouxls Kaard, right? Because we get him as a key item in Chapter 2. So if he is a card that was on the floor of the unused classroom, how would he have the capability of making a dark fountain, even if it is possible to create a dark fountain inside of another dark fountain, which we don't technically know. Just because Birdley was going to do it doesn't mean it was going to work. Rouxls also turns to stone in Chapter 2, which you'd think if he was the knight, that wouldn't be a problem, right? Because that kind of confirms he's from the Chapter 1 Dark World, which you would think that the knight wouldn't be, because like I said, he'd have to be able to be alive to make that fountain. I don't know how that would necessarily work. We've already defeated Rouxls twice, which, if he is the big bad, there could be something satisfactory there, where, like, after fighting this guy as a joke for, like, 4 chapters, he suddenly gets serious, and now he's actually a threat. But it's a hard sell, and also, let's be honest, he's kind of stupid. That's kind of his character arc, is he's kind of stupid. Toby even said, like, in an interview that he thought people were gonna hate Rouxls. Because he's annoying, which he is, but, that's why people like him, because he's stupid. Anyway, with all that said, I think we can confidently agree that Rouxls is not the... But what if he was the knight? What if Rouxls was the knight? Then what? How can we explain all the contradictions using terrible scientific methods? All we have to do is get to the conclusion and then build all our evidence to support it by twisting it as hard as we can. Anyway, you might want to look at the screen if you've been just kind of chilling out like I usually suggest you do for these videos, because I made this meme of Rouxls creating a RouxlsZILLION dark fountains and becoming God. How would he do it? Let's start. So first off, step 1, being born. Very important. Rouxls has to originate from the closet, if this is going to make sense, because he has to exist before creating the unused classroom fountain, where he's technically from, we think, at least, because he doesn't turn to stone there. But maybe he got, like, lost in the closet or something at some point, so when whoever made the closet fountain, which we assume isn't the knight because it's different from the knight's fountains, Rouxls was able to come to life and be like, I wanteth to go hometh. And then he went to the great door and opened another fountain on the other side, and that was the first fountain he created as a knight. And then, I guess, then he was like, Ieth haveth mucheth power, and went and overthrew the kingdoms, and then he was like, I wanteth more, and decided to do the whole chapter 2 thing. So, if you followed my closet theory, which I did a while ago, it basically suggested that the closet might actually be connected to the bunker. And when we see Chris and Susie fall in chapter 1, they're actually literally falling down into the tunnels underneath the town and into the bunker fountain, which is why the closet fountain is so unsettling. If that's true, then maybe Rouxls was in the bunker, which could give him a connection to Gaster. It's just as likely as Rousey having a connection to Gaster at this point, so, like, who could say it's not there? So, if he is related to Gaster, which I did say I was going to talk about this later, earlier on in the video, you see he's got, like, a buck tooth, except it's not a buck tooth, because if I, like, go back here, well, this is my artist rendition, but you'll get the picture. When he opens his mouth, this, like, string over it remains there. So it's actually, like, something else, and it's vaguely reminiscent of Gaster's face. Like, if you're looking at his face, which, by the way, I want to bring up, the Rouxls sprites are extremely inconsistent. Let's put it on screen right now in editing, even though the whole point of this PowerPoint format is I don't have to edit. Anyway, the swoosh in his hair and the thing in his mouth kind of makes his face look like the typical Gaster, or Mystery Man, if you want to be precise, that we're known to be. So maybe he's like a shard of Gaster or something, which explains why he's got all this power, because he is a Darkener, right? So if he's a Darkener, he needs somewhere to gain determination from, and who better to get it from than Mr. Gaster himself, right? Either Gaster giving him his own determination, maybe this is Gaster's, like, Dark World form or something, or maybe he's extracted determination from somebody like Des in some sort of determination experiment, which he may or may not have been running in Undertale, and then give it to Rouxls, because Rouxls, for some reason, is his choice to be the knight in this scenario. Anyway, does Rousey know that this is the case? Because actually, there's a decent amount of parallel between Rouxls and Rousey, besides their names both starting with R. I promise there's more. Of all the Darkeners I was talking about earlier, Darkeners kind of have history to them, right? Where, even though the fountain was just created, like, a few days ago at most, maybe, like, today in the case of the cyber world, there's, like, this whole history for Spamton going all the way back to, like, 1997, right? Which we assume is based on their history as an object. Even though they weren't alive, that history still applies to them when they are brought to life. Rouxls and Rousey, notably, are the two characters that act the most like they were born yesterday, right? Rouxls thinks that, like, push a box on a straight line is a hard puzzle. And he's constantly readjusting his personality. Like, in the first one, he dosteth talketh like thiseth. And then in the next chapter, he becomes a pirate for some reason. And talks like thiseth, I guess. Anyway, Rousey does the same thing, where in chapter 1 he has his little hat disguise, and then at the end of chapter 1 he reveals his Asriel-looking form, and in chapter 2 he talks about not knowing what being Rousey-like is like. Like, he's learning how to be a person, which is kind of similar to Rouxls, except Rouxls doesn't have anybody to count on other than himself, so he's kind of just, you know... going deeper into the madness that I'm sure Rousey would have if he was left to his own devices. There's also this quote, okay? This is from Susie. At the beginning of chapter 2, after we wake up from napping all the way through class, Susie says, "What's the matter? Had trouble going Betty by last night?"
Me too, Chris. Like I could sleep after yesterday. Did all that stuff really happen? Lancer, Rouxls, everyone. Are they still... Look, you've been wondering the same thing, right?
So people have been speculating a lot, especially Chris Knight people, what Chris does after the Chapter 1 cliffhanger. Obviously they eat the pie, because we know they've done that. They probably plug in the TV, unless it was some sort of, like, TV, like, Toriel did it for some silly reason, or somehow it was, like, Dark World magic. It's probably Chris that plugged in the TV. So here's what would support Rouxls Knight, and this is actually very important for Rouxls Knight if it's going to happen. Chris can't get to sleep, so they decide they're going to eat the pie to try to, like, you know, calm themselves down and then go to bed. Doesn't work. So instead they try to use the TV to do that, but that also doesn't work. Their mind is still just racing about the adventure they just went on. So they make their way downtown and get into the school somehow, going to the closet and finding it empty. Because after all, we don't really know how Rouxls got back to the castle town, right? We left Rouxls at the edge of the unused classroom. So, what if Chris is smart enough to think, oh, it's something from that other room, because a lot of the stuff, it's like obviously an object, you know? Like there were clear parallels drawn in Chapter 1, like this is the checkerboard, and oh, it's like the checkerboard field or whatever. So Chris goes back to the unused classroom, and what object would you immediately think to pick up if you were looking for Rouxls? Well, if you were to ask me, I would say the Rouxls Kaard, okay? So Chris grabs the Rouxls Kaard and goes back to the closet dark fountain to bring it to life. And what comes out? That's right, it's Rouxls. What? Oh? This is important for later, okay? I'm setting the scene here. And Rouxls and Chris have a discussion, because it's kind of weird. Susie hasn't been told that the Darkners are objects yet. When we leave the Dark World with Lancer and presumably Rouxls in our pocket, Susie just thinks Lancer dipped on them. She doesn't understand that Lancer is the card that Chris has in their pocket. And it seems like that's being sort of deliberately hid from her by Rouxls, because Rouxls tells Chris, like kind of whispers it to them, to go get all the objects in the other classroom. So it kind of implies this history where Chris has figured it out, obviously, and you can assume that's just because Rouxls assumes Chris is paying more attention than Susie, like we've figured it out already as the player, maybe. But it could also be because this thing happened on that night, and our hint to it is what Susie says in Chapter 2's beginning, and really Chapter 2's beginning in general. So, just to jump back for a second, Rouxls gets his ass kicked, right? I think this could actually be kind of formative to him deciding to kind of become the knight, as it was. Like, he showed up, let's say, after being literally born yesterday from the closet fountain, created this world, and then decided, I am going to try to rule it. But then he gets his ass kicked, and he realizes, well, can't beat the Lightners, so I shall find someone who can, and then I shall teameth up with them and destroy the Lightners, yes! And that's sort of the idea. It kind of explains why he wouldn't just try to rule the kingdom himself, because he literally can't. He is not strong enough, at least not yet. Anyway, joineth the Lightners. So in Chapter 2, Rouxls joins our inventory, okay? And we assume that Rouxls is represented by the Rouxls Kaard. So to paint this scene of what happens, right? Chris and Susie are about to leave to go to the library. And Lancer says,
Oh, don't worry, guys. I'll come with you.
and then Rouxls is like, I will also come. And they're like, we don't want you to join us. And he's like, yes, I will join you. And then he becomes a key item, apparently. You can view Rouxls and Lancer in your inventory while you're still in that dark world, and they are there. So Rouxls has been added to our inventory at that point. However, we don't necessarily know that Rouxls Kaard is the Rouxls Kaard, okay? So here are my thoughts. Rouxls decides to join the Lightners as a way to try to find this next evil foe, right? But then Chris, after going to the closet the last night and learning that Rouxls is the Rouxls Kaard, is like, well, I'm not taking Rouxls with us. Nobody wants this, right? Nobody wants Rouxls to join them. So instead, Chris leaves the Dark Fountain with Rouxls and Lancer. Rouxls gets left behind. And he's like, well, fucketh. But he's got the power of teleportation. So he's like, well, I suppose I shall just make my own way. And he makes it to the Cyber City and creates the Dark Fountain there in order to essentially stay alive, let's say. How does that work? Maybe he creates it from under the ground, right? He goes through the bunker. He used to live there. So he's able to travel through the bunker tunnel to get under the library and then create a dark fountain in the dark world that is the bunker and then jump into the library dark world. This would also explain how Rouxls got to Chapter 2's Dark World. And if Rouxls is trying to keep the truth that he is just a card a secret, then it makes sense for him to say, oh, I sense the darkness, to try to keep that a secret from Susie, right? Otherwise, why wouldn't he just say, oh, Chris brought me, or whatever? Because he's trying to keep his identity as a card a secret from Susie. I think it's possible. We'll get there later. So, he goeth to Cyber City with the power of teleportation, creates the Dark Fountain, and meets the glorious Queen. And he thinks, whilst I know about the lore that Rouxls does, as we were both made from the same darksteth fountain, I supposeth, soeth I will become a pirate to avoid becoming a stone. Because, computer pirating. Maybe Rouxls doesn't know what computer pirating is. So he's like, I willeth become a pirate. Instead of becoming a computer pirate. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense why he's a pirate. Other than it's just funny. Which, that kind of is the write-off for everything Rouxls does. But, if we're assuming he's actually the big threat, then him making this choice does kind of have some implications. Anyway, he's going to become worthy for the Queen by using the Lightner imagination junk. So I've talked about in a previous theory, the idea that objects created with pure imagination, so like the Neo body that Mettaton drew up from his imagination entirely, is inherently more powerful because it's not tied down to the limits of mundane reality, right? If Rouxls Kaard is the Rouxls Kaard, then he's just the Rouxls Kaard, right? Like his special powers or whatever are all for show because he's just full of bravado because that's what the Rouxls Kaard is like. But if Rouxls Kaard is like, I don't know, some sort of like classroom rule set, let's say, that Gerson drew up a long time ago for his classroom. And that's why he's got all these like weird tendencies of like old Englishy talk and these like weird teleporty powers, then that makes a lot more sense. And it means he can potentially grow infinitely to serve whatever purpose he wants to, right? As long as it requires him, or as long as it allows him to follow the rules, which, Rouxls Kaard. I do want to draw another parallel I forgot to mention earlier with Rouxls. And interestingly, Rouxls being the Rouxls Kaard makes extra sense because Rouxls teaches the player the rules of the game, right? And he is continuing to teach us the rules of Dark Worlds when he introduces the Roaring in Chapter 2, for example. So if Rouxls is the Rouxls Kaard. If Rouxls is the Rouxls Kaard, then that means that his rules, while they could be true, they could also just be like his nature. It's his nature to do the playground thing of making up new rules in order to keep the game moving. You know what I mean? So that's something to keep in mind. Also, if Rouxls is like a dark version of Rouxls and is following like the evil rules, then it makes sense that he has this like weird code of trying to find somebody to follow. Like the big bad of whatever Deltarune is going to be, whether that be Gaster or whoever comes after the night, which we assume will happen eventually. Rouxls is their Rouxls. Is that character's Rouxls, who is trying to set the stage for them to complete their role in the prophecy. If we are to believe Rouxls Knight is true, which real Rouxls Knighters in the chat, in the comments, in my brain, anyway. Step 3.5, she isn't interested. So the queen does not actually work with Rouxls. So that kind of... Rouxls has a weird turn in this chapter, right? If you play it the normal way around. If you play it Snowgrave, then I assume the reason why Rouxls is completely stone already is because it takes too long for us to get to the mansion. So Rouxls has run out of time, essentially, with his pirate gimmick, which doesn't really make sense in the Cyber City world. So in the normal route, though, he helps us after that. And if he's the knight, wouldn't his goal be to like not help us ever? But if Rouxls has figured that the queen will not help him in the current state of things, then he's got two options, right? And both of them kind of make sense in terms of his actions. Either he can help the Lightners defeat Queen and move on to the next foe, and hopefully that foe will work with him, or he can defeat Queen with the Lightners as a big show of power, and then Queen will work with him. Either way, it makes sense, because Rouxls Knight is the truth, baby. Anyway. Step 4, keep traveling with the Lightners. Yeah, eventually they'll come upon an evil ruler worthy of Rouxls' efforts. So the idea is they keep progressing through the story. They keep finding eviler, stronger villains. Eventually, Rouxls is going to find the guy that wants to work with him, and they're going to take over the world, baby. That's the plan. And there is nothing wrong with this theory now. All that has to happen is that Rouxls is actually the Rouxls Kaard, while Rouxls Kaard is something else. Both of those things were in the closet and were essentially created by the bunker dark fountain that may or may not exist. After that, Rouxls creates the Kaard Kingdom and tries to usurp the throne, but actually Spade King ends up doing it, and he's like, well, dammeth, I supposeth I shall have to play second fiddle. Then the Lightners come, and they beat up the king, and Rouxls is like, wellst, I must find a stronger villain to follow. So, before Chapter 2 happens, Chris comes back to the school because they can't sleep after the dreams of the... Or not dreams, literally not dreams, anything but dreams. After the imagination, like, running through their mind about all the stuff that happened. So they go back to the school and they pick up the Rouxls Kaard and bring it to the closet. And the Rouxls Kaard is actually Rouxls. And Rouxls explains how all that works. And then they, like, leave. Chris leaves to go to sleep, or at least be in bed by the time Toriel is there to wake them up. And Rouxls thinks, well, if maybe Chris wants a room here, and that's what he spends the rest of his time doing that night. Chris and Susie come back. There's foreshadowing that this was the stuff that happened. They go to the dark world. Rouxls is already there, but nobody else is. Rouxls whispers to Chris to go pick everybody else up from the unused classroom. Chris obliges. Boom. Rouxls is back, baby. Whatever Rouxls was in that classroom somewhere. Anyway, Rouxls says, I'm going to tag along with you, and jumps into Chris's inventory. However, Chris and nobody else wants Rouxls to tag along on this adventure, so Chris covertly either ditches Rouxls in the dark world, or just throws Rouxls into the ball of junk they have in their pocket, and continues from continues on in Chapter 2's plot with the Rouxls Kaard and the Ace of Spades, or whatever it is. I think it's the Ace of Spades. The Jack of Spades. It's the Jack of Spades. That's what I mean. Which is Lancer and Rouxls. So when they go to Chapter 2 and jump into the Cyber City fountain, which was created by Rouxls before they got there, because Rouxls was discarded in the other fountain. He decided to teleport underneath the library at the bunker in order to get back at them, creating another dark fountain and opening another world and potential for him to find another evil ruler to preside under. The thing that jumps out of Chris's pocket is in fact Rouxls and not Rouxls. Rouxls is dropped off somewhere in the Dark World and tries to make his way back towards the beginning to meet up with Chris and Susie. When he does, he can't tell Susie that he's an object because he's trying to hide that fact to not break her heart. So he says he sensed the Dark Fountain. Yes, that's what happened. And now we're all back together. Rouxls decides to try to use the junk that the Lightners threw away. It was created with their creativity, and he knows that that will give it special powers. So he gets the junk shop people to make this weird boat tank thing for him. In the meantime, he's trying to seduce the queen, saying, "Queen, I ameth your most loyal henchman," but she's not listening. So he decides to go on with plan A, construct the big junk thing, and turn it against the Lightners as a show of force. However, it backfires because it turns out it's loyal to the people that made it, so it doesn't put out its full potential. It's not as powerful as something like the Neo body. In that way, Rouxls is now trapped. He decides he's going to use his ultimate attack, but his flimsy pirate disguise fails at the most crucial moment because computer pirates are not literal pirates, so that was only going to get him so far. He was literally born yesterday. Can you blame him? Anyway... After that embarrassing display, he knows he needs to show the queen something powerful in order to get her on his side. And if it doesn't work out, at least the Lightners will move on to the next chapter and the next big bad that he can then try to hench under. And hencheth he will. And that's Rouxls Knight theory, baby. Why is he doing it? 'Cause it's all he knows. I was madeth to be a henchman. I musteth find the evilest ruler. And one day he will. And it'll be like Gaster or something. And he'll be like, Fathereth, I have cometh to helpeth you. And Gaster will just like incinerate him or something. You've played your part, Rouxls. What? So that's Rouxls Knight theory. I hope you enjoyed. Look what you've done to me. I've created an entire conspiracy theory. I hope if you're a real Rouxls Knighter, you'll spread this all over. You'll spread this on the Reddits. You'll spread this on the Discords. You'll tell people Rouxls Knight is real because Rouxls is the Rouxls Kaard, and Rouxls is actually something else. And he's got special powers because he can teleport, and we see that in the game, so you can't say it's not real. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my theatric performance of Man Goes Mad over Rouxls Kaard. This is like Rouxls' revenge for me using him as the example when I was talking about my Origins of Darkner theory all the time, where I was like, oh yeah, Rouxls is wordy and overbearing, just like the Rouxls Kaard. He's like, I ameth noteth overbearing, maketh an entire video about meast. Anyway, I did it. So... maybe I've sated his bloodlust for another year. Oh, by the way, if this ends up being true somehow, I'm the only one who called it. You were here first. There's no way this is true. It would be kind of funny, though. Okay, bye.